raw, uncut, and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness with your hosts John McCaskill and Will Schneider. Here we focus on helping men and those with men in their lives solve some of life's complex challenges through understanding the practices of mindfulness and how they can help. Each episode is in an environment free of judgment and criticism, with a focus on authenticity and inner peace. Let's dig in.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Men Talking Mindfulness podcast. I'm retired Navy SEAL commander turned mindfulness teacher John McCaskill, and my co-host over there on the other side of the screen is renowned New York City yoga and mindfulness teacher Will Schneider. Today we are honored to welcome back a distinguished guest who's no stranger to our community, Elaine Smookler. Elaine is a multifaceted expert with an extensive repertoire, including her roles as registered psychotherapist, certified mindfulness teacher, life balance coach, and an inspirational keynote speaker. She's not just a teacher and a writer, but also a singer and a comedic performer who brings a breath of fresh air to the mindfulness world. With over 2 decades of experience, Elaine has pioneered a range of lively and unique programs through the University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies. These engaging programs such as Mindful Martinis, Breathe In and Laugh Out, and her acclaimed online course, A Mindful Way Through the Creative Process, have made waves and garnered a dedicated following. Elaine's connection to mindfulness isn't just as an academic or professional, it's deeply personal. She's worked closely with those navigating through the realms of loss, grief, and stress, offering wellness programs to the staff, doctors, and parents at the hospital for sick children. Her commitment extends to being an esteemed instructor in the University of Toronto Medical School, where she provides clinical programs like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and stress management initiatives for numerous employee assistance programs. As the voice behind the Inner Wisdom column at Mindful Magazine, a platform with readership of over 750,000 monthly users, Elaine touches on topics that resonate with many. It was through her insightful writings that we discovered her and learned about the transformative potential of mindfulness in healing the broken heart, which was our original episode with Elaine. Today we're covering another challenging but very important topic with Elaine: mindfully preparing for the end of life, for ourselves and our loved ones. It'll be a conversation of depth, reflection, and hope, and we truly are grateful to have Elaine with us to explore this terrain. Before we dive into this important discussion, I'm going to turn it over to Will for some announcements.
Hey, great to be back for another episode. Elaine, thank you for being with us here today. Just our merch store, everybody. Get your Men Talking Mindfulness merch by going to mentalkingmindfulness.com/shop. Thank you for supporting the show and following us on social media. Anywhere social media is, you can find us at Men Talking Mindfulness. John actually has a new book out. We're going to have our book out soon enough, but John has a book out. And if you're still, still working on our joint publication, but check it out. John's a super short read, Unleash Inner Strength, and you can get the link by texting strength to 33777. Once again, for John's book, text strength to 33777. And also, hey, speaking of text, of texting keywords, we're texting MTM to 3377. Once again, that's text MTM to 33777, and you can submit your voice memo to us, and we'll be answering those questions live on the air. So those are just a couple announcements for us. I'll also give a little shameless plug as well. Every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, I have a breath and meditation class, so you can drop in live. It's free on Insight Timer. So if you just go to Insight Timer, either the app or online, just a 30-minute breath and meditation session. It's free of charge. You want to drop a donation, I always appreciate those. But that's on Wednesdays at 6 o'clock Eastern Time. So drop in. I mean, there's no shortage of practices out there. And it's nice to have a live practice because we can also interact and kind of comment, and I can answer your questions as well. We're going to dive into our grounding practice next. I'm feeling pretty grounded, guys. I don't know how you go.
Good.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell's going on. I'm battling a little bit of a cold over here. So maybe I'm just in this fatigue, kind of place or something. So All right, so we're just going to work with a double tap breath. We're going to do 5 of these. It's really simple. It's 2 inhales, a big first inhale, really trying to drop that breath down really deep into our belly. We're gonna take a second inhale, a little one after that, and then blow it out through the mouth like you're blowing out a candle on your happy birthday. So let's begin. Exhale all the way out. Try to get as empty as you possibly can. Really kind of feel that emptiness just for a moment. Let's take that first inhale. Pause. Second breath through the nose. Hold for a moment and let it go. And really softly relaxing, easy through that exhale. First inhale. Second. Exhale. Slower, relax, melt kind of face, jaw, shoulders. Find yourself in this space. Again, in. Second breath. Exhale. Good. You guys sound great breathing over there. Okay, 2 more. In. Slowly out. Can you feel your kind of body resting in this place a little bit more intently through the exhale? And the last one. In. Out. And take a moment and thank yourself for tuning in to Men Talking Mindfulness today, and then come back, open your eyes, maybe make some of those movements and put a smile on your face, because we have Elaine with us today.
That's right.
And once
Elaine
again,
always brings a smile to my face. She's
certainly
great
she
energy.
does.
So. And I also have to smile because I don't think I've ever heard you call that the double tap breath, Will.
Okay.
I think I've heard you call it other things. And in my old line of work, double tap meant something way different. It meant like to put two bullets, 2 rounds.
Put 2 rounds of peace in your soul, John.
There you go.
That's it. 2 rounds. Bang, bang. Boom, boom. Whatever it takes.
That will settle the mind.
Yeah, that will settle the mind permanently.
Yeah,
and it will also be end of life.
End of life. Exactly.
All right. That's enough of that.
What's a good way to start the show, John?
It is.
Talk about death, right? What the hell?
Yeah, why not? So, and we're going to talk about the role of humor and joy in it as well.
Right.
And Elaine, again, you're a perfect person for that. So thanks for joining us, and we're excited to get into this. And I know before the show, I checked with you, and I'm going to jump right in. Since we had you on the show to talk about heartbreak and how to deal with heartbreak, you've dealt with a broken heart, and it's also tied to end of life. How are you doing? And can you tell the audience what has happened since the last episode?
Sure. Well, apparently I'm somebody who really cares deeply about research, because only a couple of days after the wonderful experience I had here with these fabulous men, my husband very unexpectedly went into the hospital, and within a few weeks he died. And it all happened very, very quickly and was a shocking and profound experience. And some of it I might have time to share, but it was nothing that I could possibly have planned for, even as a longtime mindfulness teacher. And that was all part of what was so fascinating. The whole journey was completely, and I had come here talking about the fact that I'm in a program that I teach called Mindfulness Informed End of Life, and yet there I was experiencing live, and it was totally different. And then a few weeks ago, my mother also unexpectedly passed away, and both of them passed away in my arms.
Wow.
So that was, wonderful and challenging, and there's just so much to say about those experiences. But I come to you from the field, and I think about the work of John in the battleground and his past life, and that you look at people who've been through something and you think, okay, that person probably knows a little bit more than somebody who's only theorizing something. So great to be here with you, and thank you so much for inviting me back.
Yeah, honored to have you, and so sorry for both of those losses. And and again, definitely want to talk about mindful prep even for the unexpected, right? Like if you have an aging parent, you kind of understand or expect that to eventually happen. We all eventually die. Bad news. None of us get out of this alive, right? But the unexpected, sometimes we have to prepare for that unexpected death anyway, and just be prepared for what might be coming. So thank you again for being here to discuss that. So let's talk about how one can mindfully prepare for end of life. And when I say end of life, I want to discuss both sides of that coin, both as the person approaching end of life and as someone preparing to grieve for the end of life of a loved one. How do we prepare for that mindfully?
Well, first I want to take everybody off the hook and say you kind of can't. And we're going to talk about how you kind of can, but I also want to really tell everybody you kind of can't. And that's really important, because one of the things that could come up if you're a high achieving person is you want to get death right, or you want to get the death of your loved one right. And for all kinds of reasons, that may or may not unfold in that way. So mindfulness, reminding ourselves, is not a control mechanism. We're not here to control our emotions. We're not here to control their emotions. It really is a way to learn how to be with what we cannot change. And of all the things that we cannot change, dying is absolutely one of the things that every single being, whether you are a person, a plant, pet, really any living being, is going to die. And it's very shocking to our egos that this is happening. So feel free to ask some specific questions.
Well, I'm definitely going to delve into the self-compassion piece, right? You mentioned that we can't really prepare for this. And when we fail at things, quite often we beat ourselves up. And
Right.
when we fail for preparing for end of life, again, whichever side of that coin we're on, whether it's us dying or somebody that we love who is dying, and we fail at preparing, then we start to beat ourselves up. What role does self-compassion have in all of this?
Well, self-compassion has a huge role in everything, because at the end of the day, there's no way to get anything in life so-called perfect. There I was at the bedside of my beloved husband of 25 years. He was the love of my life, and nothing I wanted more than to 100% be there. So I want to very candidly share some of my experiences with you, and then maybe some of the antidotes, and I share some of these with you just so that if it happens to you, you don't think it's because you're a failure. It's because you can't really 100% prepare.
Yeah.
I'd also been there for the death of other people, and I thought, okay, this is horrible, but I could handle it. But what I noticed with the death of, first of all, denial comes up really quickly. They're not going to, for both sides. You're not going to die. We're going to get absolutely everything we can. Every person who can come and help us is going to come and help us. Which has happened in my husband's case, he did not realize he was dying. And so we had to kind of recognize that what is the act of kindness there, to insist that he understand that he was dying, or to wait until he was ready to come to it and then be able to have that conversation.
Sure.
So the self-compassion part, one of the things that I'll reveal is, first of all, exhaustion comes in really quickly, depending on how your loved one is dying. In my case, it was a combination of starting off in the hospital and then thinking we were bringing him home to die a few weeks later, and then finally going into hospice. And each one of those was challenging in completely different ways. They were, so the hospital offered support and pain management. Home offered familiarity and community support, because all of my friends came in to help.
Sure.
And the hospice is what I described to my husband as, to ask him if he wanted to go to the hospice, ultimately, was what I called the hotel-spital. So it was an opportunity to go somewhere really beautiful where that's all they do is take care of people at that end of life.
Right.
But the part that I am referring to is, what shocked me was when I was there facing the death of my husband, once I realized this was what was happening, I thought, I've been a meditation instructor for so many years, and I have probably 10,000 hours of practice sitting beside someone's deathbed, just being with it, no problem. And instead, what happened was I felt like an animal that was caught in a leg hold trap, and I wanted to chew my own leg off and run away.
Oh, I
So
bet.
that was the first, and that was very difficult for me to accept. Like I was like, oh, that's not how I'm supposed to be. So that was just one part of the phase, but I just share that because if there are parts of the phase where you feel, I just can't do this, I can't watch this person I love die, I can't be with this. It's just part of the phase. And I just share with you, it was just part of my phase, but I do want to be honest and say it was part of the phase. And I couldn't understand how I had all this experience and still wanted to escape. And so it's part of just being human. We are not hardwired at this day and age for death. It's not something that
Right.
most of us see around us. It's not like in the olden days where Granny and Grandpa died in the house with us. It's sequestered away. We don't see it, and it's also feels like the end of something.
Right.
So I was able to allow myself to be as I was. It allowed me to relax and be with him in his process and recognize it wasn't just his process, it was our process,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't just him.
Right. And Will, I know you've got questions, but Elaine mentioned something that's kind of got me thinking. And it's actually related to a book and an author that we're going to bring on down the road, Michael Easter, and the Comfort Crisis, and his new book, Scarcity Brain. Both fantastic reads. Started reading Scarcity Brain. Well, it's really
cool.
good.
Great.
Anyhow, in the Comfort Crisis, he mentions how in today's modern age, most of us in the West have done exactly what you said. We've kind of sheltered ourselves from death, comforted ourselves from the fact that death is a real thing. Like you don't see it like right as often as we used to. And he talked about, I forget the name of the one culture, but one culture in particular that he flew out to visit had, when somebody died, they brought the body out, they let everybody see it, they let everybody mourn, they let everybody celebrate that person's life, and that particular group of people actually lived happier lives because they didn't see death as this morbid thing that can't be discussed. It was just a part of life. It's a part of the circle of life, right? And I was wondering, in your experience, have you seen any differences in various approaches for end of life and how it is handled or perceived?
What do you mean, like different?
Like different. Like, I know you're teaching this course. Have you, by chance, run into other cultures where death is not seen as morbid and maybe just not necessarily celebrated, but just not seen as badly as we particularly perceive it in the West?
Well, for sure. Well, just when you look at any Eastern philosophy, particularly Buddhism is really all focused on, as an example, and I'm not here promoting Buddhism, I'm just saying in light of what you're asking, it's all about recognizing that death is inevitable for all of us. There are cultures that handle death in various ways. In the Irish culture, I think they do keening, they wail at the end. I don't know if they still do that. But I think one of the things about being able to grapple with death is I believe it also helps you face your life much more richly.
Right.
One of the challenges is if we don't think we're going to die, that's maybe part of how we got into where we are in the world today, that if we think we're going to go forever, we don't realize that we have a limited number of seconds.
Right.
And to be able to really ask ourselves, how do I want to spend my life? Comes, I think, from recognizing that it's time limited. And you mentioned your parents, John. You said they're both vegetarians. I'm going to wave to you both. Hi. You said they're vegetarians, and I was smiling to myself because I thought, right, there are people who think, well, maybe if I'm vegetarian, that maybe I won't die actually,
She's
or
not
maybe
talking about you, mom and dad, just to be sure.
you won't die. Don't worry. No, you guys aren't going to die. Not to worry. Not to worry. But I'm talking about other people. And just recognizing that we kind of want to bargain a lot with trying to stay alive, but not die. Maybe I shouldn't even say stay alive, not die.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some cultures that have accepted. That's not my specific background to talk about the cultural differences of death. Sorry,
No, it's
but
fine. Just
I do
curious.
sort of overall know from my experience and research that the various people in various times have handled death differently, and that's affected how we handle pain management, which is another really interesting thing to look at, because in our North American society, whereas you talk about this need for comfort, one of the challenges that rises up is a discomfort that we feel experiencing the suffering of another one that we love.
Mm.
And so potentially what ends up happening is we over medicate people before death because we think that we're trying to help them not feel pain rather than recognizing that there are some intrinsic aspects of suffering that relate to death. And actually, what's beautiful, this sort of points to what you were saying, John, what's beautiful is learning how to be with what's happening. Just like with every part of mindfulness, we're training ourselves not to avoid it, but to notice. And the research that I was reading about just the other day talked about how these nurses had recognized, or researchers recognized, that people found death much more easily when they were with people who allowed them to just have their own experience. They
Oh,
weren't
wow.
over medicated unless that's what they wanted. So
Right.
that's another thing that's important to know, is that the dying might be the last act of freedom that any of us, the last opportunity for us to decide how we want to do it, and to
Mm.
be able to ask somebody, would you be willing to let me walk with you on this process? How would you like to handle the situation? Giving autonomy to people is really important. Um, we worked a lot with personal support workers in the last few weeks, and I noticed that a lot of them, with the best of intentions, wanted to treat my husband as a baby, and he was not having it. He did not want to be treated as a baby. And so that, giving people respect, and if they are able to answer the question of what do they want, how do they want to be, who do they want
Mm-hmm.
around them, I find it's really important to honor people's what they wish,
For
what
sure.
they wish.
Well, that's a big part of self-compassion, is turning towards your suffering. Really like being with and not turning away and not resisting or denying. And also we worked last week, John, we talked about self-acceptance, and the fact that it's like this is just accepting what is. And the more we can accept, the more we can be with, and the more we can really be present to what's going on, instead of kind of getting in our mind and wishing it was something different. Could you just, Elaine, I would love if you could maybe dive into some of the conversations that you had with your husband when, when you both realize, like, oh, wow, this is not just, a, something that, an illness that's going to go away, but something that it's going to put me in the ground, and you're going to lose your husband. Like, so could you maybe walk us through some of those conversations, and maybe there was a moment where, the light really went on for both of you to realize that, death is at your doorstep.
Thank you. That was a really interesting moment, and I learned so much about myself
Mm.
going through this. So part of what came up for me at first was I perceived that my husband did not want to know that he was dying. So I did, and I had a lot of people around. So everybody had to be like, no talk about dying. It was almost like
Oh,
a
wow.
horrible comedy show. He's in
Yeah,
our
right.
he's in our living room in a hospital bed. But when asked, what do you think is wrong with you? He said, yeah, something's wrong with my legs. And can you ask the doctor when I'm going to be better? And I was like, what?
Crazy.
So I fed into initially his this idea that he wasn't dying. So that was very challenging. And I think it's important to mention, because who knows what you're going to experience when you get there. And this is one of the possibilities, that person is just like, either they don't acknowledge it, or they can't acknowledge it, or it's not a kindness to them to acknowledge it. And what happened in our case, which was so wonderful, was a doctor came to our house, and I said, whatever you do, like, don't mention the war. Whatever you do, don't talk about death. Don't talk about death. She said, got it. Okay, so she goes into the living room, just me and him, and she says, okay, Mr. Nemiroff, so what do you think is going on with you right now? And I was like, so meanwhile, it all came out, and he said, she said, how do you feel about the fact that your cancer's returned? And he goes, oh, am I gonna die? Is that what's happening? I'm gonna die. And she said, yeah, probably. And I'm sitting there trying to control everything from
Right.
So that was really interesting. So at first I'm trying to control everything. Then after she left, this speaks to what you just asked me about, Will. So then after she left, I was like, oh, okay, well, it's out there. And he said, did that doctor just say that I'm going to die? And I said, well, what if that was what was going to happen, honey? Like, then what? And he stopped. He was lying in his bed, and he paused a moment, and he said to me, well, these were the 25 happiest years of my life. I want you to know that.
Love it.
And I was so happy that I got that from him. He said, I'm okay. It's okay that I'm dying. I've had a really good life. And as I said, these have been the happiest 25 years of my life. And I share that was our entire discussion.
Wow. Okay.
We did not, after that, he didn't want to talk about it anymore. And after that, and again, this could happen for you, after that, he, delirium took him. So this was just kind of like a rare moment where he was able to have a conversation. And that's when I also got to ask him, well, while you're here, do you want to go to the hotel hospital? Like, do you want to die at home? Because there were lots of challenges to being at home, and for him, but in terms of the kinds of conversations that you could have, it's helpful to remember if this is possible for you. So I'm mentioning it like this to say, look, it might not be possible for you to do what I'm going to suggest. It might be a situation where you're with somebody who doesn't want to acknowledge that they're dying, or as happened with my mother, she was fine, and then she passed out, and she didn't come back, and within a few hours she was dead, and it all happened really fast. So there was no opportunity to speak to her with words. So I had to then only speak to her with my hand, holding her hand as she was in the ICU for the last 14 hours of her life. And they say hearing is the last thing to go. So in the case of my mother, I told her, don't worry, we're going to take care of my father. It's okay. You're safe. You're loved. You're okay to go. And I felt it was really important for her to know that it was safe. And for my husband, even though I couldn't speak to him, I couldn't have a conversation with him, I will share that the nurses in the last night said, would you like to get into the bed with him? And I'm looking at me, I'm not tiny, and the bed is very tiny. And I was like, you want this to go in there with him? And all those tubes, like, how's that going to work? And I mentioned this because this might be something you could ask for. It was something outrageous that never occurred to me. And for the last night, I lay kind of pressed up against the bed. I lay there, and I remembered that hearing is the last sense to go. My husband couldn't speak, but I remembered he told me how much he loved hearing me sing. And so it was just him and me in that room. And so I spent a few hours just singing to him. And the nurses came in, and I said, please look at his face, tell me if he looks like he's freaking out, like, tell her to stop or get out of this bed. But they said, no, he looks happy. He looks good. And so I got into that hospital bed with him, and I sang to him. So I'm just giving you some options for things that you can do if actual conversations aren't possible. Other things that you can do if conversations are possible are to ask yourself whether you're the caregiver or the person dying. If this is my last opportunity to communicate with this person I love so dearly, what would I want them to know? And I feel fortunate that even though I didn't know my mother was about to die, I must have, like a dog, sensed it. Because in the
Yeah.
week before her life, I asked those questions of her, like, what are, and my father, like, what do you like about me? You know, like those are like the child questions, you know. But I was like, in those moments, I just felt that child part of me going,
Of course.
what do you like about me? Like, what do you love about me? And so that, from my standpoint, that was one thing. I also took the opportunity to tell both of them all of the things that I thought that they had done such a wonderful job of in their lives, that they had been wonderful in their careers, and that they brought so much to so many people, that they were creative and smart. And I made sure that I told them how much I appreciated them and all the good things that they had done. Again, just thinking, if they're just there and they don't know, to be able to leave with a sense of, okay, I did well in this life. I did what I could for people. So asking, is there something that you would like to know from this person? Even if you feel kind of embarrassed to ask, it's your last chance.
Mm.
And my siblings have said to me that they regretted that they didn't have that chance to ask those questions, or even just be with them at the end.
Wow.
So that's something.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this song from must have been the early 80s. It's a song that I used to love back then. It was by Mike and the Mechanics, called In the Living Years. And it was a song where the son is singing to the father, and the father is gone. And he's saying something to the effect of, it's too late when we die to admit that we don't see eye to eye. So apparently the singer and the father had some type of disagreement that they never reconciled on. But it's also too late when we die to ask those kinds of questions. So we've got to ask those kinds of questions, make those kind of statements, maybe offer forgiveness as the person on the deathbed, or offer forgiveness for the person on the deathbed. There's, I would imagine, a lot of that comes into play as someone is dying. The desire to be forgiven, or the desire to forgive the person. Have you seen that? Have you felt that?
For sure. And I want to speak to that and something else you said. So first of all, of course, who would not like to leave with some lightness in their heart, that they didn't
Right.
do immense damage and this is their last chance to do anything. But so that's why I took that time with my husband and with my mother and my father, even though he's still alive, to really make sure. So this is important while they're alive. Don't wait until that deathbed moment, by the way. This is hopefully a wake-up call to realizing, well, what's stopping you from doing that now? I mean, are you going to hope that you're going to get there in time? And also, it's an opportunity to have conversations if that person's willing, and it's okay if they're not. So don't blame yourself if you're like, I thought I was going to get to have this super meaningful conversation with this person and they're not having it. But the other thing I want to say is, it's really hard to know. I do actually think we can do work after that person is dead. And you asked about cultures. There are various cultures that view those days after death in various ways. And I just think, even if you don't believe in anything, it heals the heart, I think, to be able to say, even if you think it's so-called too late, to be able to speak to that person, just say what it is that you want to say. You know what? I didn't get the chance to tell you this, but I really loved you. Yes, we had some difficulties. As you said in that song, we didn't always see eye to eye, but now that you're not here, I just want you to know how much I appreciated you. I do that with my husband. I say to him, all the things, wonderful things that he brought to me, and how wonderful our marriage was, and how fortunate I was. And I felt that, I don't know if it's doing anything for him, but it's helping me.
Right.
So don't underestimate what you can do after the so-called death of the body. In terms of healing your own heart, since self-compassion was one of the things that we talked about. And something that, I can't remember if it was you, Will, who mentioned earlier, or if it was John, there are people who do practices, by the way, where every night or every day at some point, they picture themselves at their death.
Yeah.
And so there are practices that you can do, and they might seem like, well, why would you want to do that? Because Even from the chemical standpoint, can you see how it would calm the chemistry of your body if you had anything that's strange is terrifying, anything that's more familiar, even a dog that seems scary, once you get to know it, you realize, oh, it's just a big puppy as it bites your head off. But but I think it's really helpful to be curious, since we are going to die. Well, what would, if you do yoga, corpse pose is one of
Yeah,
the,
right.
to be
Yeah,
able
it is.
to touch that.
Well, I've actually used in workshops I've done, and they're like, "Will, that's pretty morbid." Like after the workshop, where because I've had these meditations where we're asked to view our funeral. How many people are there? What are people saying about you, right? Like, and that's your legacy. And and if you're not living up to that imagination of your funeral, then you better get your ass going, and then start like living up to that potential, or at least start to live that life and begin to leave that legacy, because to really drop in and it's just profound to just think about your what would people say about you at your funeral, or how many people would show up, like how long is the line going to be, or how short is it going to be, and if you haven't really been a good person and you haven't really been living up to your potential, then what's going to be said? Or if you've really been taking life by the horns and doing the best you can and living up to your potential and being a good, kind, loving person and living for others and trying to make the world a better place, it's like, that's going to be some different conversations and different comments about who you are as a person. So it's like I think it could be very empowering and very clarifying to know, or just to imagine that. And Buddhists do this very often, like they do death meditations, because they're very in touch with it. It's called samsara. It's the cycle of of birth, life, and death, and it doesn't stop. Like you mentioned earlier, every single organism goes through this birth, life, and death cycle. And I mean, and if we don't align to that's just the way that things behave on this planet, then you're in some sort of, I don't know. So I mean, I think a lot of people,
I think the word's denial.
yeah, denial, right, are in deep denial that like the train's not coming for you. But the moment that you come onto this, enter this planet and take your first breath, like you're already on that road to your death in some ways. And it could be a great advisor, your death in the I can't remember this one philosophy. It's in Journey to Ixtlan by Carlos Castaneda, a book I read a long time ago. He goes, I always keep death 6 feet to my left, is what he says. And I look, when I need help, I advise my death on my left and see how it can inform this moment now. And it's just like, what a great guide, in some ways. So instead of denying, right, using the power of that to create urgency potentially in your life.
Yeah. Another song. I don't listen to that much music, but I do like some songs. And this one song, I'm sure you guys know it, is Tim McGraw, "To Live Like You Were Dying." And in the song, it's basically Tim speaking to a guy who is notified that he's got 30 days left or something. And then he says, well, what did you do? And the guy says, well, I went skydiving, Rocky Mountain climbing, and I rode a bull named Fu Manchu for 8 seconds or something. So he did all these things that he had been wanting to do all his life, and he did it in the last 30 days. And the point of the song is to live like you're dying, because like you said, Elaine, when we continually think that we're not going to die, we think that we're going to have forever to do everything, and we don't. I mean, we don't, even before we die, we don't have forever to do everything, because others die, or we may lose some capabilities of our bodies and our minds before we ever die. So you've got to do these things that you've been wanting to do them when you can, and kind of embrace life. And would you say, Will, take it by the horns, right? And really live life. So sorry to bring another song.
No.
I think it's also important, like Will was talking about, death comes for all of us, but actually it's also important to see that we're experiencing all kinds of deaths all the time. Where jobs end, marriages
Yeah.
end. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
relationships. Mhm.
your house burns down. Maybe
Oof.
maybe you moved into the country to get away from the craziness of the city, and there was a mudslide and it wiped away your whole town, which happened in British Columbia and various places. So there's many different kinds of death experiences that we go through, that it's so helpful when we're not clinging too tightly to the way we think things should be. And I want to speak to that Tim McGraw song a second,
Yeah.
because it's really, I just want to put this out there, that it's really tempting to think that life is only about doing. Like, what am I going to do? I want to travel here, and I want to go there, and I want to climb the mountain, and I want to do this. But
Sure.
but at the end of the day, and yes, of course, live a rich life. I try to live a super rich life. And at the same time, it is really the beingness of life that's
Sure.
so
Yeah. Good point.
incredible. It really, really is. It's like, okay, I could go do something, or I could be super brave and have a conversation with somebody that I don't want to have, and
Mm.
think about them. Because you talked about, like, what kind of self-compassion can we offer ourselves. And I think it's really important to recognize that as the caregiver, we could end up with the compassion, so-called, empathy fatigue, really, not
Right.
compassion fatigue. It's really empathy, where we're there burning ourselves out. And so we do need to make sure that we put the oxygen mask on ourselves as well, that we care for ourselves, that we recognize when we need support. Sometimes we're going to have to go home, even if you think, oh no, I can't go home. What happens if I'm gone? But you really have to be courageous and recognize you're not going to necessarily be there for that moment of death. And that is actually okay. It's okay. Whatever happens is okay. When we remember that we can be with each other in the spirit of mindfulness, the beautiful thing is we can hold each other in our minds and hearts. Maybe I can't come to your bedside, as my siblings could not. Had to get on planes. It happened so quickly. I was the one there. They couldn't come. But we could be together with that person and just hold them in our hearts, be there, and remember that our connection and our relationships really are what's I think, the most important thing about our lives. That's what's going to be our legacy
True.
for most
Yeah.
of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anything else as far as when that person is with us that needs to be done or said? And I know there's like kind of estate planning and, like, plan for the funeral and that sort of thing. And then I like to go into, okay, when they're gone, and then kind of getting into the grieving process. But like anything else while they're still with us that might be Men Talking Mindfulness, that we could be mindful of, that we haven't kind of talked about yet.
Sure, let's get into some practicalities.
There you
Absolutely.
go.
So
Yeah.
first of all, I don't drive, and the car was in my husband's name.
Mm.
And so trying to sell the car after he was dead, and he hadn't put a file together of that, was really challenging. Just something like that. A will is imperative. If you do not have a will, I don't care what age you are leaving the people you love in a very, very difficult position without a will. There's all kinds of legalities that come from not having a will. So absolutely. I have, my father has told me that he started compiling a file for, like, where is everything kept? Not everybody has money at the end of life, but if you are in a situation where you've got money or property or this or that, you want to make sure, if you care about the people who you're leaving behind, that you leave some kind of trail of breadcrumbs for them so they know how to find stuff.
Right.
That's a lot to ask when you're already grieving, and then you're going through thousands and thousands of pages of this and that. I went with my parents to actually plan their funeral years and years before. So I had a document that I knew how to trigger. Okay, who do I call? If this happens, where are they going? How does that work? Because I want to tell you, my dears, executive function is one of the first thing that goes for some of us. Like, you think, and my executive function is usually excellent, but I was like, what?
What? I could
What?
see it.
I remember my brother said, where should I put these bagels? I went, where should I put these bagels? I don't know. I don't know, how do I answer a question like that? Because you're like thinking, no, every question feels difficult. So So preparing is such an act of kindness. Prepare the practical stuff. Where's the money? How do you get to it? What are your wishes? My
Yeah.
mother was, thankfully, both my mother and my husband uh, were able to express to me, I do not want to be intubated. If it comes
Mm,
to that, please do not intubate me. And that was really important for both of them because we got to the end with both of them. And in order to extend their life, they would have had to be intubated, which means sticking a tube down your
yeah.
throat. And I talked to a doctor who had been intubated during COVID, and they said, I had no idea how horrible that was until it happened to me. And they came back from that. So I'm just saying it's up to that person. You might want to ask them, do you want to be cremated? Do you want to
Yep.
be buried? And then you get into the challenge of, well, but I want you to be buried. You want to be cremated? Like
Mm,
my husband was not into, he was not a mindfulness practitioner. He was a comedian and professor. So I had to really think, well, what would honor him? So I also, a lot of comedians came and spoke at his funeral. So it was totally different than a more serious and you know somber kind of thing. But in terms of like just the practicalities, figure out what you want done with your remains. It's hard to look at, but you got to do it. Otherwise, you're leaving that to somebody else. Figure out if you want to be intubated. Figure out if you want to be resuscitated. That's
right.
really important to tell people because if you don't want to be resuscitated to come back to a poor quality of life, that's important that you tell the people and prepare them for that. They may not want to hear that. Don't you want to be here with us as a vegetable no matter what? Well, that person may not want
No.
that. So it's really helpful to respect their wishes, but also it's helpful to prepare practical stuff so that it makes it easier for people to honor your wishes and not have to deal with so much stress mingled with grief.
And I'm glad you said that kind of no matter what age. Like in the military, one of the first things you do before you go on a
Mhm.
deployment is you prepare a will. Whether you're married or not, whether you have any stuff or not, you prepare a will. It's almost a requirement. And I've had a will since I was, I don't know, 19 years old. And I've, obviously updated it. And it is fairly morbid going through it as a 19-year-old saying, oh, I've got to prepare for my loss. And then the military has a life insurance plan. If you die on the battlefield, where does the money go? Does it go to your parents? This kind of thing. But I've had friends die on the battlefield, die in training, die in a car wreck, and they didn't have a will, and then they also didn't have that kind of computer file that outlines where everything is. And that was one of the hardest things for the spouse and the children was, how do I manage, like you said, the car thing? That seems fairly trivial when you just say it, but when you really break it down, there's a lot to sell a car. And then magnify that times a house, a bank accounts, stocks, bonds, everything else, and it just becomes super complicated very quickly, and that's the last thing that you want to be dealing with when you've lost that executive function. So for our listeners, I definitely implore you to prepare that will and have a file somewhere that you share with somebody, not just your spouse. I have an electronic file that I have shared with my spouse, but I've also shared it with my brother. Hey, look, it's called the just in case file. Like, what happens? This is all my bank account information. This is my password and login, and it's obviously a secure file, but it's an important one because otherwise there may be tens of dollars in an account that they don't get access to, because I by no means am I rich, but I want them to get everything that they're due.
But that's another point I just wanted to pop in, which is, for all kinds of reasons, we might have separate bank accounts from one another.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes a big issue if your spouse cannot then legally get into, and the same with credit cards.
Mm-hmm.
There are all kinds of things that surprised me. Like, you've got to write a credit card company and with a death certificate to prove to them your spouse or whoever is dead in order for them to cancel it, because with issues like fraud, you do want to cancel things like their credit
Sure.
card. Sorry, but you want to protect yourself, in which case you got to think, can my spouse access these things if need be?
Yeah, for sure. And
Practical.
the other piece that you mentioned, yes, so definitely the practical, but this is where I want to come kind of back to the joy and the comedy. You mentioned that because your husband was a comedian, you're a comedian, you had a lot of comedians come to the funeral. What role does humor play in the preparation for end of life, again, on both sides? And then how do you feel about finding joy? I'll preface this real quick and give you maybe a second to think about your answer. I worked with some firefighters a couple of years ago. They had lost a friend, and I went to go talk with them, and there were some guys smiling and laughing, and then I would see them instantly shut their smile down and instantly shut their laugh down. And I said, hey guys, it's okay to laugh while you're sad. It is not offending your brother that you lost because you're laughing within a few days of losing him. And I think a lot of people feel that because they're in mourning, I don't know, what was it, the old movie, I forget what it was, but they had to dress in black and they were in mourning, and one of the girls laughed, and somebody said, or one of the maids was like, "You's in mourning, you can't laugh." And I was like, man, that's exactly what these guys are feeling. They're in mourning and they feel that they can't have joy. So what role does humor have in it, and how can we allow ourselves to simultaneously have joy while we are in the mourning process?
Well, I really feel the word sacredness is important here. That sacredness is something totally different to each one of us. There were members of my family who believed that to give my husband the proper funeral, that he needed to have a certain religious kind of positioning within that, right? Except for my husband was not of a religious bent. And so I felt, well, that's your opinion. That's not who he was. He was a person who had a lot of comedy in him. That's how we met. We met in a comedy club. His whole life was about humor. And it was an honoring of his sacredness and his sacred path through life to honor that humor. It really was an honoring of who he really was, and not trying to whitewash that to pretend that he was a different person. And so humor ended up being, in this case, I feel like I should share the link of the funeral, because it really was pretty. Several people said to me that was the funniest funeral I've ever been to, and somebody else said, "Oh, well, when I was asked what the most recent comedy experience I had, it was at my friend's funeral."
Oh, Jesus.
So you might go like, even the owner of the chain of clubs called Yuck Yucks, which is in Canada, he came and spoke at my husband's funeral too. And everybody, it really is important to see that humor, appropriate humor, we're talking about mindfulness, right? So mindfulness is always about being aware. We're not just burbling out our insecurities and distresses and trying to push away discomfort with humor. But that's because mindfulness is not about pushing anything away that we can't face. So humor doesn't need to be perceived as something that we're using to push away difficulty. It actually allows us to integrate the difficulty in a way that may be more natural to us. I was, you could say, shocked at how able to speak. Was
MC'd.
co-MC, sounds like a weird thing to say, my husband's funeral. And hey, thanks for coming. Enjoy the veal. Did it with his son, and there were people who said to me, "You can't do that. You can't do that, Elaine. We've talked about it, and no, you cannot do it." I said, "What do you mean I can't do it?" And they said, "No, your job is to sit there and receive the condolences of everybody. You're supposed to sit in the front row, and you're supposed to." And I said, "Well, but that's not that. I'm the right person to offer this for him. The greatest honor I can give him is to do it the way he would want it, and that serves me too." But it was interesting because I felt like that movie said, that pressure from people telling me, "That's not how you mourn. That ain't how you do a funeral, kid." And I'm like, oh. Or as I said in the hospice, because everything was so shocking and new, and like I'm light, you might think, ish, but it was very, very heavy. And I kept saying to the people in the hospice, "Well, I'm learning so much for when I bury my next husband."
Oh my God.
And they were like, "What?"
That was your way of dealing with it.
Yeah, she's in denial. I'm kidding.
Okay, here, sign this. So I think it's really person to person dependent. If your nature is to relate to things in a humorous way, well, death is part of those things. It's not a disrespecting, it really is part of life. I think it's more challenging when, as you said about that movie, when we try to truncate off death as if it's a separate. No wonder we don't want to talk about it. It's over there somewhere. It's not part of our lives.
Right.
Rather than we loved this person, we are deeply, deeply saddened by our loss that they're not here with us, but we also can rejoice in the life that they lived. And I think it's really important to have that appreciation for the lives that we live and the lives that others live, and just honor it as it is. We take care of ourselves, we take care of them in the way that they want, the best that we can. Another thing I just want to pop in is I thought I asked my husband, do you want to hear music? Creativity can come in. And he said, no, I don't want to hear music. And then one of my friends came in and she didn't ask him. She just put on an old folk tune that she knew he used to be involved in the folk music scene. And she started singing. And much to my surprise, my husband, who was in delirium at that point, he started singing along.
No way.
And the two of them had a great time. And they were like, la, 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 la. And I was like watching them in the hospice. And I was like, I would never have thought to do that. That was so great that my friend recognized that she was a physician. So she had some courage to say, no, it's okay. We can do this. And so you kind of have to just go with what shows up and trust. Self-trust is so important. You're going to want to judge yourself. That's the other challenge after death. You might want to say, oh, I could have done it. Oh, I should have done it. Oh, I didn't do it. Oh, why didn't I? Please be kind to yourself. You did I'm sure you did the best that you could under the circumstances, even if you weren't there. Love yourself. Love that person. That's important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. How about we go on the other side? So our loved one is gone. I have here, there's 5 steps to the grieving process: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance.
That's Kubler-Ross's version.
What's that? I'm not. That's ChatGPT's version. To be honest, and I'm like, but thank you, Elaine, for embarrassing me.
No, I meant it's only one version. I'm saying that because it's only one version, but okay, go ahead.
I'm just kidding. Well, I mean, let's go into that. We're laughing, right? Thank you. This is fun, right? Well, let's go in the other side. So they're gone, and what was it like for you, or early experience you had? Counseling people with this. It's like, what are kind of the first strikes? As we begin to realize like that my life has changed forever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, shock is a pretty common one. You might feel numb. You might not cry. And you might judge yourself because you think, I'm supposed to be crying right now. But depending on how you relate to your own emotions, you might not cry. Or it might be too overwhelming to cry. Like for my father, emotions were not his go-to place. And he found, that's just data. He was data driven. So for him, he had to go into his head. So shock can be one of the things that comes up. Denial that this has even happened or is going to happen. Eventually you can come to some acceptance of what? Acceptance that this is what's happening, whether you want it to happen or not. Like all of life, things happen all the time that we may not want to have happen. But what we notice from mindfulness is that if we can accept what is, even if we don't want it, even if we don't like it, it's easier on the other person. And you said after their death, it's so much easier on us and the people around us. It is what's happened. Being kind to ourselves in those moments might involve maybe you have some shocking behavior that even comes up after the death. So I want to ask people to forgive themselves for that. You don't know how maybe you want to go out and get drunk. Maybe you want to go out and have an affair. Maybe you want to go out and do all kinds of things. And the reason I say that is you might then look back a few months later and say, oh my gosh, where was I? How did I do that? And so to be kind to yourself, you've probably never been through anything like that before. And the panic and the terror and the confusion causes all kinds of things to go out the window. So really be kind to yourself. Were there other things that the anger, anger is an important emotion. It's okay to feel all emotions if you can do your best to let yourself feel anger as an emotion, as an energy, as a chemistry, like to feel it, rather than getting into your story. The story might be, you know what? That doctor really screwed up, and that person wouldn't have died if they hadn't have done that. It's
Yeah.
tempting to look for someone to blame, and it really takes something to be able to sit with, this is just how it is. You can go ahead and look for someone to blame if you want to, but where is that going to get you? And to
Yeah.
what end? Why would you need to do that? Who does that serve? Always you can ask yourself, who does it serve to do any of these things?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I have here bargaining. During this stage, individuals might attempt to make deals or bargains in an effort to change the outcome or find a way to cope with the loss. They might find themselves thinking if only, or what if kind of scenarios. So I mean, I guess that kind of probably aligns with denial as well. It's
But
just
what's
like a different form of denial. Yeah.
But what's important about what you just said, Will, that I think really
Mm.
fits in here is if you could flash forward yourself to that if only, that can be a great wake-up call to you in the living and say, don't
There you
wait
go.
until the if only. Why don't you picture that person that you're fighting in? That's not how you load a dishwasher.
Yeah.
That sounds like that might have been an argument in the past. That was right. That was very fresh.
Tupperware cannot go on. Okay. But it's really helpful to recognize that all of these things might come into play. And so what does that mean? It means that while you have the opportunity, remind yourself. That is something that I, in my practice, I'm so happy to say, I do make a point of telling people I love them. I make a point of telling people what I appreciate about them. I make a point of thinking to myself, what if this is the last time I ever see this person, whoever it is? Those are practices that I live every day. And they do help cut through a lot of gunk and clutter in the mind around what's important. When you just say, what if I never see this person again? Will I be happy that we just had this argument? Well, I think it was important.
Yeah.
So that using that bargaining awareness while that person's alive.
What would you say? Because depression can set in. I mean, obviously, in this circumstance, what would you say to kind of? And I mean, obviously, it's a process, but to maybe alleviate some of that depression, or eventually kind of pull yourself out of the depression of the loss of this loved one. Any kind of comments or
Yeah,
things around
sure.
that?
Well, first of all, thank you for mentioning that because, again, as humans, low mood is always going to be part of our experience, whether it's around death or any type of death, of the ending of something. So one of the first things that we might want to do is just accept low mood is here. This is how it is. Noticing the thoughts that come up, noticing the emotions, being with it.
Yeah.
We could also, so we want to be kind to it rather than saying, I shouldn't be depressed. So we can recognize that. We can have a little conversation. There's a practice that we acknowledge what's here and then let ourselves maybe, the practice actually is called the 3-minute responsive breathing space, where the first step is notice the thoughts and emotions and body sensations that are here when you feel really low and horrible. Shift your attention in the second step to your breath, to a present moment focus, and then expand your attention out to the whole body to be able to be present to what's here with a little bit more space. It's not going to get rid of it. And coming back to depression, what I see with my father is I also need to give him space to grieve. We're very uncomfortable with depression and dark, low mood. It's tempting to want to cheer somebody up out of it.
Yeah.
But I know from my own experience and what I'm seeing with my dad, you can't always, it's a process. So you're going to go through some dark times where you are recognizing, oh my gosh, the landscape of my life is totally different. But then it's important to bring activity in. Maybe you've done it here, a pleasurable activities list. It's good to do a list of all the things that make you happy. When you feel now, while you're good, do a list of all the things that make you feel good and that give you a sense of accomplishment. It could be mowing the lawn. It could be loading the dishwasher. It could be anything at all. And when you notice that your mood is getting really, really low, it's helpful to reach out to somebody and say, hey, if you see me not calling you anymore, can you reach out to me? It's helpful for us to recognize that we are going to have these feelings. We want to care for ourselves with self-compassion. And then eventually, when we're ready, find some of those pleasurable activities or the ones that give us a sense of accomplishment so that we move out of being sucked into that vortex as our lives. It's different for everybody. Some people might still be making breakfast for their loved one after they're dead. I know somebody told me that they were doing that, and that was part of their grieving. Other people, maybe the next day they've gone and found somebody new, and it takes something to judge that person and say, hey, that's, you do you, that's okay. So being able to always with depression, we want to accept what's here, whether we want to or not. It's not a failing. It's just part of the human experience. But in order for us to not fall into the challenge of depressive relapse where we live in depression, we want to be able to recognize that also it's good to be able to look around and see that there are beautiful things in life as well. When we see, okay, I feel really, really sad today. And that's the other thing. It's going to come and go. Your grief may not come right away. You might be watching a commercial and burst into tears and go, what the heck is going on? Or you never know what's going to set you off. And to just have a ton of space for yourself where you say, that's okay. I'm allowed to do it my way. It might take me a day, a week, a month, 6 months, a year, years. My dad was with my mom 66 years. It's probably be a while before he is not thinking about her every second. And it's not right for me to try to crowd in and say, hey, let's go play volleyball.
Right.
Especially if he's 94.
Wow. You have, so what about, you have experience in the hospital for 6 children. Like, what about losing a child? That's gotta be.
Can I
go for it, John. Yeah.
Just, I'm going to try to make it through this one without tearing up. So my little girl who's now, healthy and strong, when she was 6 months old, she had a major surgery, and we were at Boston Children's Hospital. And Boston Children's Hospital is a fantastic hospital. They make it very children friendly. I'm sure the hospital for sick children is similar in that they kind of make it child friendly. But my little girl, she went through the surgery, and it was very difficult handing her over to the surgeon, not knowing what could come. But we were very blessed in that she came back from that surgery healthy. I mean, she had to recover from the surgery, but we walked around that hospital for weeks and saw children that were terminal. And we knew they were terminal, and their parents knew they were terminal, and they knew they were terminal. For like Will asked, how can parents prepare if they are in a situation where they're allowed the time to prepare, right? Like in maybe terminal cancer or something like that, for the death of their child. And then if they're not allowed the time to prepare for it and it happens quickly, unexpectedly, how can they grieve for that?
Well, first, I want to say I don't work specifically with the children at Hospital for Sick Children, so I can tell you what I know, but that's not my area of a specific expertise.
Okay.
But what we do know from talking to the clinicians there is the children are often, it would be different because a 6-month-old, of course, but the children are often much more accepting of the situation than the adults are, like considerably. So it's one of the things that's helpful for parents, I think, to realize is, first of all, of course, you're going to be grieving. So you have to love and accept that pain is here, difficulty is here, loss is here. We're not trying to get rid of it. That is what you're experiencing. And mindfulness is about being with what is, even if it's something untenable and unimaginable. So being with it, but also allowing yourself permission to be there with that person for whatever time you have available. As I said, it isn't always that easy. You might have this idea that you're going to go and just love being by their bedside, but watching somebody you love dearly die is a very painful experience for some, and maybe too much for some to handle. But if possible, just being able to be there with them, letting them give you the cues as much as possible. Do you want to play? Maybe they'd like to draw something. Maybe they would like to, maybe if they know that this is what's happening and they have permission, what is it they would like to do? How would they like to spend this time? What's something meaningful for them? Maybe they want to go skydiving, who knows? But it's about allowing, right? We want to allow noticing that resistance is the greatest challenge. The resistance, which is natural, who you're not just going to let, oh, okay, well, you're dying, bye-bye. We're allowing for this experience that, as excruciatingly painful as it is, we add to suffering when we try to resist it. And the evidence shows that when we can be with what is intolerable, it is much more easy for everyone. So being with, also focusing on what you appreciate about that person, and is always helpful, right? And then holding them in your heart, maybe a token of some kind can be helpful, but allowing yourself the space to accept this has happened. It might be the most painful thing that has ever happened to me, but can I be with this just like everything else in my life? Can I love that I had this time with this person, even if you only had 6 months? Could you love that you had 6 months with this amazing being? And even if you're, we have a lot of expectations. We expect to live a long life. And that's just not how it is for all of us. It just isn't, we don't know. Even if I remember my father had a stroke years ago, the person in the bed next to him was 19 years old, and he'd also had a stroke, and he was young and fit. So you just don't know what's going to come for you. So being able to accept also that you probably did do your best. I know that's something that's going to come up for a lot of parents who, if only I could have done something differently, if only we'd gotten here sooner,
Right.
if only the right doctor had seen my kid, if only the right nurse had handled, if only that nurse hadn't said that to my child. There's going to be many, many difficulties that come, and to be able to hold the whole situation with love and understanding and recognition that people are doing their best, even if you don't feel they are. Everybody is doing their best, and it's helpful to just have appreciation for what is unbearable.
Thank you for that.
It's hard.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, let's start to wrap it up. I know you wanted to talk about the course at the University of Toronto, the Mindfulness Informed End of Life Care Certificate. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I'll make sure that a link to take that course is included in the show notes.
Wonderful. So a thanatologist, who's a person who studies death, named Michelle Shaban, we're so fortunate to have her living in Ontario, where I live, and she created, through the University of Toronto, a program for clinicians, but also anybody who's going through the dying and death process. She created a 6-part, year-and-a-half program called Mindfulness Informed End of Life. And I just want to share that the six sections of it, and I'm one of the teachers of that, the first one is Introduction to Mindfulness Informed End of Life Care. So it just kind of gives you the overall view. And you could come and just do one of these modules. You don't have to do them all, but they are absolutely fascinating. They're taught by all kinds of different clinicians, people who work with the dying, people who work in hospices, nurses, all kinds of people come and share, their doctors. It's really brilliant. The second one is Mindful Reflections on Attending to Suffering, which, needless to say, because suffering is not always something we can alleviate, and mindfulness is all about learning how to be with. The third one is Mindfulness for Compassionate End of Life Care. How do we want to end our lives? Who do we want to be with? Where do we want to be? Making a little more explicit what that could be like if we're fortunate enough to have that kind of authority and autonomy at that point. Integrating mindfulness into pain management. Another thing that, because not everybody wants the same level of being medicated. Some people would actually rather have to deal with their pain and be more present, intelligent, lucid. Yeah. Not everybody wants to be knocked out. So it's really important to notice that maybe it's your sensitivity to their suffering, but actually you want to know what they can bear.
Yeah.
And many different ways of handling pain management. It doesn't have to necessarily be medication. Mindfulness is all about finding other ways, anchors for our attention. So it doesn't have to go through that, but a conversation is helpful. The fifth one is integrating mindfulness into end-of-life counseling models. And that is for people who are counseling the dying, because all of us are floundering, and it's helpful for us to have a conversation with each other about, well, how are you doing that? And how are you doing it interdisciplinarily? And then the sixth one is practicing dying. And that was for me one of the things that came from me for the final, when I participated in the final module, I did participate in all of them, but practicing dying, was they asked after we did this little practice, well, what showed up for you? And I was really amazed that what showed up for me was, it's all okay.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea how I would feel going through this. And I was like, oh, actually, you know what? I do feel like I'm living a good life. If I died right now, I feel like I'm happy with who I am and how I've done my life. And strangely, it's all okay. So that was helpful for me, because that was freedom for me to finally open that monster in the closet door, and go, well, how do I feel about facing my death? Maybe I'm like, no, I don't want to bother, please don't hurt me. But instead, when I did face it, what surprised me was that it was all okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, as the living, at least I
Still living.
For those listening and couldn't see Elaine, she's just checking by like pinching herself and making sure she was alive.
That it's really brought me a lot of freedom as the living to face. I don't know for sure how it'll be, but to just know that I feel okay about it has given me a lot of space. And I can still have death 6 feet. I read that book. I can still have death 6 feet to the left of me, but it's really like, hey, how you doing, buddy? Looking good. Not good though. But to be able to make friends, I think making friends with ourselves, making friends with death, making friends with suffering, because we're not talking about lying down and taking what we can change. We're talking about anything that is not changeable, anything that's does not have a choice. Like, it's not like if I had only wished harder, my mother wouldn't have died. Well, I wished pretty hard. Believe me, I was wishing pretty hard, and I was practicing pretty darn hard at her bedside, because I'd learned from my husband, and I was able to be there more easily at my mother's. Oh, that's the other thing. Go in with as many dying people as you can. Mm-hmm. That's really, really helpful and will help make you more comfortable with it. And actually, one other thing with one of my friends who died, at the end, she'd lost her language skills. She was originally Dutch. She couldn't remember English. I don't think she even knew who I was anymore. In fact, I'm sure she didn't. And so I was panicking. What do I do? She's dying right here in front of me. What do I do right now? And I said, some voice in my head said, just look into her eyes with the eyes of love. Maybe she won't know who I am, but everybody knows what love looks like. And it's a very wonderful experience. And so I just thought, I got to keep me calm, offer her love, and whatever it is, she'll feel safe and know that it's okay. And I could hold her hand as she journeyed from this world to the next. So even if they don't know who you are, don't panic. Offer them the eyes of love and see that is a beautiful way to unfold somebody in ease.
No, thank you, Elaine. That's a great closing remark, I feel. You mentioned before we went live about leading us through a 5-minute meditation on, is it on death or
it's the 5 last minutes of your life.
Okay, 5. Okay, so we're all gonna die after you listen to this episode. So just be ready, everybody. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
We've been preparing this whole time.
Yeah, we've been preparing for these closing 5 minutes.
Michelle Chabin says to everybody that she chose me to be part of her program because I put the fun back in funeral.
There you go.
I like it.
Thank you.
Capital F-U-N.
Yeah, just what you need. So this was a practice that I found was really profound, and it was, so with your permission, I'm going to take us through this. It's about 5 minutes. And I just want to say to everybody, if it's too much for you, if it's too overwhelming, of course, feel that you have the permission to stop, to open your eyes, to get up, to turn on ABBA, whatever you need to do. If you want to go through this, please do. It might be interesting. If you can't handle it, can you honor yourself for managing your own window of tolerance and knowing it's okay. You don't have to do anything that overwhelms you unless you really, at least now. Eventually you won't have a choice, but today you do, potentially. Okay, so this is shall I begin?
Please.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a visualization meditation that came to me from Michelle Chabin, and it's a way to enhance awareness around our values, our beliefs, and practices associated with dying, death, and life, something that hopefully we're all interested in engaging in. So I invite everybody to take your meditative stance, whatever that might be. It could be standing on one foot or lying down or sitting in a chair, whatever you'd like. And have the sense that you're bringing yourself home, whatever that may mean for you, that sense of bringing yourself home. So let's begin with breathing in, which potentially you're already doing or you're probably not alive. But we mean focusing on the breath, letting yourself be aware that you're breathing in, you're breathing out. Thich Nhat Hanh would say, breathing in, you know you're breathing in, or I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. And you might want to do that a few times till you feel centered and settled. Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out, i.e. I'm present. And can you feel yourself being held by this beautiful earth? Deeply held and protected. Even if that wasn't the experience in your life, can you allow yourself that possibility now? Settling in and knowing you are safe in this moment. Having the sense that we are returning to the earth, to the elements. It's natural. It is safe for us to do this. Home is a welcoming place. And now if you could take your attention to a time and a place where you might contemplate where you would be for the last 5 minutes of your life. So do you picture yourself in your bed? Or are you in a hospital? Are you alone? Are others there with you? Can you just notice, are you grateful to be ending this time in your life? And with medically assisted death available, some people are grateful for that moment. Or not. Maybe you're not grateful. Maybe you're tired or worn or agitated, or maybe you are at peace. Can you just imagine this very gently? Now, if you can imagine all of the elements of these last 5 minutes that have come together to make it the most important 5 minutes of your life, if you had choice, what would be necessary for you to feel seen, safe, soothed, and secure, which relates to Dan Siegel's attachment theory? Safe, seen, soothed, secure. What do you need? Where are you? Who's there with you? What will bring you comfort in the last 5 minutes of your life? Or how can you bring others comfort in these last 5 minutes of your life? You are feeling deeply connected to all things, all beings. At the same time, you feel yourself transforming, becoming, leaving behind the familiar while still feeling connected to it all. You can, and maybe you do, both feel connected and freed. Can you feel into this? Is it peace that this brings you, or is it something else? And can that be okay, whatever it is? What is it you bring to your awareness now? What is it that arises for you in your awareness of what must be done to realize the fullness of these precious moments? What must you do now today so that these last 5 minutes are as you wish them to be for you and others? Is there a conversation you have to have? Is there something you must do so you can be in these last 5 minutes fully and well as you prepare for a transition from your skin-bound body into something else. What do you imagine this something else to be? Settle into this imagining very gently. Ask yourself this question today and every day. If today were the last day of my life, what do I need to do or be? What would you do differently, or what would you do to have a sense of abundance or completion in this life now while you're alive? Who would you call? Who would you apologize to? Who would you tell that you have loved them? Who would you ask forgiveness of? Who would you tell that their very being changed your life, sculpted it, made it? This, my dears, is the practice of dying. We do it now in life, so that when we reach our deathbed, we have nothing left to do or be. We simply rest in the awareness that we have lived more fully alive and caring with each breath. This changes how we live with ourselves and others. Perhaps take time to map out what arises for you, and then implement those incremental changes over days and months and years, so you prepare for your dying times and death.
Thank you, Elaine.
That was
That
powerful.
was very deep, very profound. Yeah, John.
Thank you so much for that, Elaine. And yeah, definitely some thoughts, emotions came up in that I'm going to definitely write down. So thank you for that. And thank you for being here today and sharing everything that you did, from your professional background, but also from your personal. I mean, you just opened up, and we really appreciate you just being open and vulnerable and authentic with us here today and with our audience. So we cannot thank you enough for being here and for being you. So thank you for that. And yeah,
Pick a different topic and invite me back. Okay? No more research on this one.
Elaine's joke before we went live. I'm going to share this. I hope you're okay with it. She said, that on the last episode we talked about dealing with a broken heart, and she had some personal experience with that. And then before we wrapped up that show, off the air, we said, hey, could you come back and talk about end of life? And then she was granted with the ability to do some personal research through the loss of her husband and now the recent loss of her mother. And she said she wants the next episode that we bring her back on to be how to have great sex. So she'll go out and do that research and report back.
There you go. Yeah, take photos and send some videos.
Whoa,
right,
man,
please.
things just got really, really weird.
I'm kidding. I don't know. I'm just kidding. I had to say it.
Yeah, what are you guys doing later?
Yeah, there you go.
Will single.
There you go. Yeah.
Oh, here we go again. All right. Well, before we get any more weird, hey, thank you again, Elaine. And for our audience, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you guys. We appreciate you sharing the show. And if you did get anything out of the show and you think anybody else that tuned in will get something out of this, please share it with them. Share it with them as the podcast. Share it with them on YouTube and everywhere else. And we appreciate you all. And until next time, take care.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you so
Thank you
much
for joining us today. We hope you walk away with some new tools and insights to guide you on your life journey. New episodes are being published every week, so please join us again for some meaningful discussion. For more information, please check out mentalkingmindfulness.com.